My girlfriend tested my loyalty every week until I failed one I didn't know about. They say love is a battlefield, but I didn't know my girlfriend was the one holding the gun until she pulled the trigger in front of everyone I knew. Hey everyone, before we get into the video, don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button if you want more stories just like this. Thanks for the support. My name is Ryan, and I am 27 years old. For the past 2 years, my life has been a relentless, exhausting game of chess where I was the only player unaware of the rules. To the outside world, my relationship with Vanessa was the envy of the entire social circle. We were the couple that matched outfits at Halloween, the pair that hosted the most decadent dinner parties, and the duo whose Instagram feeds looked like a curated highlights reel of a romantic comedy. But behind closed doors, our relationship was not a partnership. It was a laboratory, and I was the rat in a maze. Vanessa possessed a beauty that was disarming and a mind that was constantly calculating. Obsessed with a twisted concept of loyalty that she insisted was the only metric of true love. It started small, almost innocently, during the first 6 months of our dating life. I would come home to find a stranger's jacket draped over the couch, or I would see a notification on her phone from a name I didn't recognize, followed immediately by Vanessa's icy stare. She wouldn't say a word. She would just watch me, her eyes scanning my face for the slightest twitch of jealousy, the smallest hint of insecurity. If I asked who it was, I was accused of being controlling. If I didn't ask, I was labeled indifferent. It was a psychological tightrope walk, and I was constantly losing my balance. I remember the first time I realized this wasn't just a quirk, but a lifestyle for her. We were at a crowded coffee shop, and she accidentally left her phone on the table while she went to the restroom. It buzzed repeatedly with a text message thread from a contact labeled "Do Not Answer." My heart hammered against my ribs. I stared at the screen, terrified that looking at it would be an invasion of privacy, but ignoring it felt like negligence. When she returned, she snatched the phone up, checked the screen history to see if I had looked, and then spent the rest of the afternoon in silence, punishing me for a crime I hadn't committed. I spent that entire night dissecting my reactions, trying to figure out the correct formula to please her. I convinced myself that this was just her way of coping with past trauma, a way to ensure she wouldn't be hurt again. I told myself that if I just loved her hard enough, if I just proved my devotion enough times, she would eventually feel safe enough to stop testing the waters. I didn't realize then that the waters were shark-infested, and she was the one chumming them. As the months bled into a year, the tests became more elaborate, more theatrical, and significantly more dangerous to my mental health. What began as subtle psychological prods evolved into full-blown scenarios that required a script I had never been given. I was falling in love with a woman who didn't want a boyfriend. She wanted an audience member who refused to leave the theater, no matter how bad the play got. And I was the perfect audience, captivated by the performance, desperate for the curtain call where I would finally receive my applause. The evolution of Vanessa's testing was gradual, like a slow boiling frog that doesn't realize it's being cooked until it's too late to jump out of the pot. By the 1-year mark, the random jackets and ambiguous phone calls had escalated into fake emergencies. I would be in the middle of a critical meeting at work, my career finally taking off after years of grinding, when I would receive a frantic text from her saying she was being followed or that she was in the hospital. I would drop everything, my stomach in knots, speeding across town only to find her sitting calmly at a bistro with her friends, laughing as if nothing had happened. When I burst in, breathless and pale with terror, she would look at me with a mixture of pity and satisfaction. She would tell me that if I truly loved her, I wouldn't have hesitated. She would say that a man who is loyal puts his woman above his job, above his friends, above his own sanity. I remember the breakup test with crystal clarity. It was a Tuesday evening, and we were supposed to be going to dinner for my mother's birthday. Vanessa showed up at my apartment in tears, packing a bag with shaking hands. She told me that she couldn't do this anymore, that she didn't feel a spark, and that she was leaving to find someone who made her feel alive. I was devastated. I begged her to stay. I pleaded with her to tell me what I'd done wrong. I offered to move mountains to fix it. I spent 3 hours in a state of absolute agony, my ego shattered and my heart breaking, watching her pack her life away. And then, just as suddenly as she had started, she stopped. She zipped the bag shut, sat down on the edge of the bed, and wiped her tears away. The shift in her demeanor was instantaneous, flipping from tragedy to triumph in a blink of an eye. She smiled at me, a cold, victorious smile, and told me that I had passed. She said she just needed to know that I would fight for her. That night, we missed my mother's birthday dinner. I had to call my mom, lying through my teeth about emergency at work, while Vanessa sat on the couch demanding I order us pizza to celebrate our stronger bond. The guilt was a heavy stone in my gut, but Vanessa's validation was a drug I had become addicted to. I craved those moments where she told me I was the only one who understood her, the only one who could handle her intensity. She isolated me slowly, making me feel like my friends and family were enemies of our love because they didn't understand the depth of what we had. She would pick fights with me before we went out, ensuring I was off balance and needy, clinging to her side for validation the entire night. I became a puppet, and she pulled the strings with such expertise that I started to believe I was dancing of my own free will. I didn't see that she was erasing my personality, replacing it with a reflection of whatever she needed me to be in that specific moment. The tests continued to multiply, evolving into scenarios that felt like they were ripped straight from a reality TV show. There was the ultimatum test, where she gave me an hour to choose between accepting a promotion that required travel or staying with her, claiming that distance would destroy us. I turned down the promotion, a decision that still haunts my bank account and my resume to this day. Then came the jealousy test, where she hired an actor to approach us at a bar and aggressively hit on her right in front of my face. She wanted me to physically intervene to assert dominance. While I tried to de-escalate the situation peacefully, she accused me of being weak and of letting another man disrespect what is yours. I spent days afterward listening to her lectures on how a real man protects his territory. Despite the red flags that were now blindingly obvious to anyone looking in from the outside, I stayed. I stayed because Vanessa had a way of making me feel like I was part of an elite club. She told me that most men would have failed by now, that most men were cowards and liars. She told me that I was special, that I was the diamond in the rough who could handle her fire. The validation was intoxicating. I felt like I was constantly undergoing a rigorous training regimen to become the perfect partner. I started to anticipate the tests. I would walk into a room and scan for anomalies, checking for planted items or strange faces. I became hypervigilant, my nervous system permanently stuck in fight or flight mode. I lost weight, I couldn't sleep, and I developed a tremor in my left hand whenever my phone buzzed. But I told myself this was the price of admission for being with a woman like Vanessa. Friends stopped calling. My family grew distant, tired of seeing me cancel plans at the last minute or show up looking like a shell of my former self. My sister, Michelle, pulled me aside at a family gathering 6 months ago, her eyes filled with concern. She told me that I looked tired, that Vanessa seemed controlling, and that I wasn't happy. I lashed out at her, repeating the mantras Vanessa had planted in my brain. I told Michelle that she was jealous, that she didn't understand our connection, that real love takes work and sacrifice. I saw the hurt in my sister's eyes, but I pushed it down, prioritizing Vanessa's approval over my own blood. I had effectively severed all my safety nets. There was no one left to save me because I had pushed them all away in my quest to pass Vanessa's exams. I was standing on a pedestal made of sand, and the tide was coming in, but I was too busy looking at the view to notice the ground disappearing beneath my feet. As we approached our second anniversary, the atmosphere in our apartment shifted. The tests became less frequent, which should have been a relief, but instead, it felt like the calm before a massive storm. Vanessa became secretive, spending hours on her phone in the bathroom or stepping out onto the balcony to take work calls. Her behavior was erratic. She would be loving and tender one moment, distant and cold the next. I assumed she was planning something big, a final exam to prove that our relationship was ready for the next step, perhaps an engagement. I had convinced myself that if I could just pass this final, looming test, the games would stop. We could finally be normal. I started saving money, looking at rings, dreaming of the day where I wouldn't have to prove my worth every single waking moment. 2 weeks ago, Vanessa announced that we had been invited to a destination wedding for one of her college friends, a woman named Kayla who I had met only briefly. The wedding was to be held at a luxurious vineyard estate about 3 hours outside the city. It was going to be a weekend affair, with rehearsal dinners on Friday, the wedding on Saturday, and a brunch on Sunday. Vanessa seemed unusually excited about this trip, more excited than she had been about anything in months. She spent days preparing, buying me a new suit that cost more than my car payment, and meticulously planning our itinerary. She told me that this weekend was crucial. She said that her friends were skeptical of me, that they thought I wasn't good enough for her, and that this was my chance to prove them wrong. The pressure was immense. I felt like I was walking into a lion's den, equipped with nothing but a fancy suit and a desperate need to please. On the drive up to the vineyard, Vanessa grilled me on names and details of her friends' lives. She warned me about specific people who would try to trip me up, who would ask tricky questions to test my knowledge of her likes and dislikes. I memorized everything like a student cramming for a final. I knew her favorite flower, her childhood pet's name, the street she grew up on, and her biggest fears. I was ready. When we arrived at the estate, the beauty of the surroundings was almost enough to calm my frayed nerves. Rolling hills of grapevines, string lights twinkling in the early evening dusk, and the laughter of well-dressed guests. Vanessa gripped my arm tightly as we walked toward the welcome party, leaning in to whisper that she was counting on me. I squeezed her hand back, trying to project a confidence I didn't feel. I had no idea that the script had been flipped, and the role I had been playing was about to be rewritten without my consent. The welcome reception on Friday night was a minefield, just as I had anticipated. Vanessa introduced me to her circle of friends with a look that dared any of them to speak out of turn. I navigated conversations carefully, parroting back the facts she had drilled into me. I smiled, I poured drinks, and I kept my arm possessively around Vanessa's waist, knowing that physical contact was part of the loyalty display she required. I felt a strange undercurrent in the room, though. People were looking at me with expressions that ranged from pity to amusement. A few times I caught groups of girls whispering behind their hands, glancing at me, and then bursting into laughter. When I asked Vanessa about it, she just waved it off, saying they were just jealous of how attentive I was. I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. The real turning point came late in the evening after the speeches. We were standing by the bar when a guy named Tyler approached us. Tyler was everything I wasn't: tall, athletic, undeniably handsome, and radiating a kind of effortless confidence that I had lost years ago. Vanessa's posture changed instantly. She stiffened, then leaned into him just a little too much. She introduced Tyler as her soul sister from college, a friend who had been there through everything. Tyler smirked at me, a look that held a distinct lack of respect, and immediately turned his attention to Vanessa, ignoring me completely. He started reminiscing about old times, inside jokes that excluded me, touching her arm familiarly as he spoke. My internal alarm bells started ringing. Was this a test? Was Tyler a plant, another actor hired to see if I would get jealous? I looked at Vanessa, waiting for the signal, waiting for her to look at me with that expectant gaze, waiting for her to see if I would step up and claim my territory. But she didn't look at me. She was laughing at Tyler's jokes, her hand lingering on his forearm, her body language open and inviting. I felt a surge of panic. If this was a test, I had to play it cool. If I got jealous now, I would fail the trust test. I had to show her that I was secure, that I trusted her completely. I stood there, frozen in a paralyzed state of overanalysis, forcing a tight smile onto my face as I watched another man flirt with my girlfriend in front of my eyes. I was calculating the variables, trying to solve the equation, but I was missing the most important variable of all. Vanessa wasn't testing my loyalty anymore. She was checking out. The situation escalated quickly, or perhaps it only felt that way to me, because I was watching my life unravel in slow motion. Tyler's flirtation became blatant. He whispered something in Vanessa's ear that made her blush, a genuine blush I hadn't seen in a long time. He suggested they go out to the terrace to get some fresh air, away from the noise of the party. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. This was the ultimate loyalty test. She was going to walk away with him to see if I would follow. If I followed, I was controlling. If I let her go, I trusted her. But the stakes felt higher than ever before. I looked at Vanessa, silently begging her to give me a clue. Her eyes finally met mine, but there was no hidden message there, no secret test. There was only a cold, detached stare, and then she turned away. She walked out with Tyler, leaving me standing alone at the bar. I waited 5 minutes. I waited 10. I told myself that if I went out there too early, I would fail. I ordered another drink, my hands shaking so badly the liquid spilled over the rim of the glass. Finally, unable to take the suspense and the nausea twisting my stomach, I headed toward the terrace doors. As I stepped out into the cool night air, I saw them immediately. They were in a dark corner of the garden, partially obscured by a trellis. Tyler had his hands on her waist, and they were locked in an embrace that was unmistakably romantic. It wasn't a friendly hug. It was the kiss of two people who had done this before. I stopped in my tracks, the breath leaving my lungs as if I had been punched in the gut. Before I could process the sight, before I could react with rage or sorrow, I heard a gasp behind me. I turned to see a group of wedding guests, including Kayla, the bride, emerging from the side entrance. They saw me, they saw the couple in the shadows, and the whispers started instantly. Vanessa pulled away from Tyler then, as if on cue, and turned to face the gathering crowd. Her face twisted into a mask of horror and outrage. She pointed a trembling finger at me. She started screaming, loud enough for everyone at the party inside to hear. She accused me of spying on her, of being a pervert, of ruining her special night with my insecurities. She told the crowd that I had been jealous of Tyler all night, that she had only stepped outside to escape my smothering, controlling behavior, and that I had followed her to harass her and her friend. The narrative spun out of control so fast I couldn't keep up. I stood there, mouth agape, the villain in a play I didn't know I was performing. The public shaming was absolute and instantaneous. The guests, already primed by whatever lies Vanessa had been feeding them for months, turned on me like a pack of wolves. I felt hands grabbing my arms, heard voices shouting at me to leave, to get away from her. I tried to speak, to defend myself, to point out the contradiction of her story, but my voice was drowned out by the cacophony of their judgment. I saw Kayla, the bride, in tears, comforting Vanessa while glaring at me with pure hatred. I was the bad guy. I was the jealous, obsessive boyfriend who couldn't let his girlfriend have a moment of peace. Even Tyler stepped up, putting a protective arm around Vanessa, looking at me with a performance of righteous indignation that deserved an Oscar. I was escorted off the property by the groom's father and a couple of security guards, my protests falling on deaf ears. I was banished to the parking lot, told to pack my things from the hotel room and leave immediately. I sat in my car for a long time, the engine idling, the reality of what had just happened crashing down on me. I hadn't failed a test. I had been played. The test wasn't about whether I would get jealous. It was a staged event designed to give her the moral high ground to leave me. She needed me to be the villain so she could be the victim. She needed everyone to believe that she had suffered through a relationship with a monster, so that when she inevitably hooked up with Tyler, or whoever she wanted next, she would be celebrated as a survivor, not condemned as a cheater. Driving home that night, the 3 hours back to the city felt like a funeral procession for my own dignity. My phone buzzed incessantly with texts from friends who had heard the story already, messages of disgust and support for Vanessa. I was blocked from her social media within the hour. The next morning, I saw the photos online. Pictures of Vanessa looking distraught at the wedding, comforted by Tyler. The caption read, "Ending a toxic chapter and finding light in the darkness. Thank you to my real friends for protecting me." The comments section was a war zone of people dragging my name through the mud, praising her for her bravery. I realized then that I had never passed a single test. The grades were always fixed. She didn't want a loyal partner. She wanted a scapegoat. And I had handed her the knife and the perfect alibi. I was free, finally, But the victory fell hollow, stained by the bitter truth that in the court of public opinion, I was the monster and she was the saint. I spent 2 years training to be the perfect boyfriend, only to realize I was just rehearsing for my own character assassination.